Well, this was a very primitive way to think about how the economy operates, and a very destructive one. Because what was happening in the early 1930s, actually starting in late 1929, was that demands were falling for a whole range of goods and services. And that meant that the derived demand for labor to produce those goods and services was also falling. So the normal effect of that fall in demand for labor would have been a reduction in the prevailing rate of market wages. But Hoover got together some of the leading employers in the country in November and December of 1929 in big conferences. He brought in labor unions, he brought in farm organizations, and he got these people to sign on to his plan, which was, whatever you do, do not cut wages any faster than the cost of living falls. In other words, don't cut real wages. But real wages is what you have to cut to re-equilibrate the labor market. That's the price in the labor market, is the real wage. Unfortunately, a lot of these people, whether out of a desire to please Hoover or go along with him, or for other reasons, that's still an actively debated question in economic history, for whatever reason, many employers, especially in durable goods industries, where demand was falling fastest, did not cut real wages. In fact, they cut money wages so little that real wages actually went up, as their workers were finding that they could buy more with their earnings than they had before. But the necessary consequence of rising real wages, when the demand was falling for labor, was a gigantic amount of unemployment. So unemployment began to grow quickly in 1930. And it was already quite high by the end of 1930, and then it got worse and worse and worse until when we got to the beginning of 1933, almost 25% of the labor force seeking work was totally out of a job, and another 25% was involuntarily working at reduced hours. Spreading the work was all the rage in those days, both as a government policy and often as just an employer policy to try to keep some income going to the workers. So we've got half of the workforce that's not fully employed at that point, half of the workforce, and in some places where the workforce was heavily occupied in the production of durable goods, you know, the kind that goes into long-term projects, which weren't happening anymore. Unemployment rates were 60 or 70%. You go back and look at some place like Youngstown, Ohio. Look at Pittsburgh. Look at any of the big industrial labor markets of the North and the Northeast, where manufacturing durable industrial goods was a concentration there. Those workers were in deep trouble. If you came out of college in 1929 and started looking for work, there was some fair chance you'd never get a real job for the next 10 years, even if you had a good education. Because as unemployment got higher and higher, an employer didn't have to hire a young person. They could hire somebody with experience for the same pay. And they did. So a lot of young people just had to fritz around, make do odd jobs, go to school when they didn't really want to go to school, and so forth. Rely on their parents, rely on relatives, rely on friends, knock around. That's how a lot of people got by. They scrapped. They had to scrap in the 1930s. Lots of people were living on practically nothing. My father, who was a young man in those days, never went without work for long, but that's because he would do things like work all day cutting a cord of wood for $1. That's a lot of wood to split for $1. I grant you, $1 bought more in those days, but nonetheless, a lot of work for a little pay. And at one point, my family actually moved to Arizona looking for work picking cotton, where cotton farms were being developed out around the Phoenix area. Think of that. Moving from godforsaken Oklahoma to godforsaken Arizona to pick cotton. And not for much money either. But, that's what you had to do if you insisted on working. Now, as it turned out, the government made it possible for some people to get income without insisting on working because it came up with a lot of relief measures, particularly after Roosevelt took office in March 1933, that provided income to millions of people, and when you add in all their family members, to tens of millions of people at one time or another, for make-work jobs or for sometimes they were okay jobs. It's just that who knew if they were worth anything? They were jobs selected by politicians and government bureaucrats. You have no way to know without a market whether something has value or not. So people built sidewalks and they built new post offices, and artists painted murals in those post offices, and actors put on plays paid for by the government, and it went on and on. There was just a tremendous effort to put people to work, but a great deal of it was make work. It's work that never would have happened had the situation been different. So it's hard to say what was really accomplished other than giving some people a few dollars worth of earnings. It made a lot of people grateful, I'll say. To this day, you can find old fellas who were in the Civilian Conservation Corps, which was a government program created in 1933 to put young men into semi-military units and send them out in the country, the woods, the deserts, to build trails in parks and to build fire breaks and so forth. And a lot of these old CCC boys just love the CCC. They're now in their 80s and 90s. They think it saved their life. And in the circumstances, they got an argument. It's just that those circumstances didn't have to exist had it not been for the government policies being enacted and implemented at that time. It's not all that compassionate to create conditions in which people are starving and then pass among them, giving them little tidbits to eat. So that's the situation here. We had a lot of government activity under Hoover, including big tax increases, creation of the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, which interestingly did some of the things the government has done recently. For example, in an attempt to help out banks and insurance companies and other financial firms, it purchased preferred shares, which is exactly what the U.S. government has done under the so-called TARP, the Troubled Assets Relief Plan, which was created to buy worthless assets from banks, but wasn't used for that purpose. And instead it was used to give money straight to banks for preferred shares, or to give it to General Motors or to Chrysler or to AIG, the big insurance company, and to other people. But don't lose hope, my friends. Don't think that the government misled you when they said the world will go to hell unless Congress approves this TARP program by October 3rd last year, which they did, because they're going to use it to buy some toxic assets. And the program is starting to gear up now. I read an article just this morning. By the end of the month, it will be in operation, and the government will be putting $3 billion into this program to relieve banks of troubled assets. The banks are estimated to hold in this country something in excess of $1.4 trillion worth of these so-called toxic assets. So if you do the arithmetic, what you see is that this marvelous government program, which took over a year to get going, is going to purchase about 2/3 of 1% of those nasty assets and take them off the hands of those banks at prices they could never get in a free market, and reward all the wheeler dealers that are running the program with lavish fees. It almost makes you think there's hanky-panky afoot here sometimes, but maybe I'm just a terrible cynic. I've been accused of that. Now, what happened last September can only be described as panic. I happened to be traveling during part of that period, and so I was in hotel rooms equipped with televisions. Now, I have a TV at home, it's just that I don't watch it. And so I miss a lot of things that the rest of the world sees. I watch only Seattle Mariner baseball games because I'm an economist and I believe in specialization.